Hi, my name is Douglas Bond. I'd like to introduce you to The Betrayal, a novel on the life of John Calvin. Calvin was born in Noyon in Picardy, a few miles north of Paris in 1509. He was probably one of the greatest Christians in the history of the church. When I first began talking with my publisher about a novel on the life of John Calvin, there are many obstacles to overcome. One was, what point of view are you going to tell the story from? I knew right off that I was not going to tell the story from the point of view of a giant like John Calvin. I didn't feel like that was going to be an effective way to have a lens to the man and to really to see that he was a human being, but he was a great man of piety, a great man of theology, a great mind, a Renaissance man in many ways. I didn't feel like I could project myself into that point of view. What's more, I felt like Calvin has been slandered down through the centuries. He has many, many more critics than he has folks who appreciate and honor him. And so I thought it would be a useful perspective to take one of those critics. Jean-Louis, my antagonist and lens that views Calvin throughout the story, is a hateful, spiteful man who wants to betray Calvin. He wants to turn him in. I'd like to see him burn like so many Protestants were burning in Paris. And yet he's conflicted in that. He hates Calvin, and he finds himself fascinated with Calvin's intellect and fascinated with what Calvin says, and finds himself even drawn to the Christian gospel and to the words of the Bible in French that he's hearing for the first time. During Calvin's years in Strasbourg, he was writing his commentary on the book of Romans. With that in mind, I create an episode where Calvin preaches a sermon that particularly bothers my antagonist. My antagonist has stayed with Calvin, has served him, has been continually torn with the desire to betray Calvin and make lots of money. There was a price on Calvin's head and had been for some time. And between being drawn to what he was teaching and wanting to know more about it, but then also, on the other hand, feeling that he was a castaway. His sins were too great. He had betrayed too many people, too many friends of Calvin who had burned at the stake in Paris, and that there was no forgiveness for him. So he's torn, he's conflicted by all of that. And he hears the sermon from Romans chapter 9 in Strasbourg, and is convinced that he is a vessel of wrath and that he cannot be saved. I won't tell you how that comes out. You'll have to read the book to find out. I attempt to create Calvin's voice from his writings, from his letters primarily. I find more a human voice in Calvin, in a more personal, intimate Calvin in the letters, but also many, many conversations, sermons, discussions that Calvin has throughout the novel with fictional characters and with some real characters. In Calvin's last 16 years in Geneva, probably no one knew him as well as the man who would become his successor, Theodore Beza. He said of Calvin that he was a beautiful example of Christian character, an example as easy to slander as it was difficult to imitate. Down through the centuries, we've seen Calvin slandered more than we've seen him imitated. One of my hopes in the novel is that readers will be inspired to want to imitate Calvin's love of the Word of God, his love of the doctrines of grace, and his deep piety and devotion to Christ.